Alright. Chapter 2. Respect. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Proverbs 22, uh, chapters, 6 verse. Discipling children in an undisciplined society may be the hardest task parents face. I am going to make it even harder by suggesting that you should discipline children who are not your own. Doug and Julie Bowling were 23 years old when they became house parents at our second foster home. One day, they were a typical young couple with an infant son. The next day, they had 7 children ranging in age up to 15. Julie recalls the first supper she served. I worked for 2 hours getting it ready and called them in when I had it on the table. As soon as they finished eating, they all got, got up at once and ran outside to their bikes and skateboards, leaving dishes everywhere. Doug and I looked at each other and realized that wouldn't do, so we went to the front door and yelled, "Get back in here!" They they filed back in and we explained to them, "This is not camp and we're not your counselors." From that moment, we began to define our relationship. The Bowlings had initially suggested that the children call them Doug and Julie. After all, they certainly were not old enough to be the children's biological parents. Mom and Dad sounded weird to them. Then came Doug's trip to the emergency rooms with their 8-year-old boy. The doctor couldn't understand the relationship between the child and the man he called Doug and wasn't sure Doug had authority to sign a medical release. Finally, Doug convinced the doctor that he was the boy's foster father. From now on, he told the children when he returned home, "You're calling us mom and dad." Children don't need extra bodies. Children have plenty of bodies. They do not need an adult, especially a parent, to be another body. They need someone they can look up with respect. That respect begins with the establishment of authority. God emphasized the point with the first three of the Ten Commandments. "You shall have no other God before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not um, misuse the name of the Lord of your God." Then in the fifth commandment, he told us who is next in line after him. "Honor your father and your mother." Establishment of authority begins with the name you are called. For Doug and Julie and their new foster children, it has mom and dad. I like for our foster children to call me grandpa. You may want children outside your family to call you Mr. Jackson's or Mrs. Daniels or coach or pastor. In less formal situations, they might address you as Miss Kathleen or Dr. Tommy. In the South, children sometimes call close friends of their parents Aunt Jane or Uncle Greg, even though they are not related. All of these titles imply the authority others should have in the eyes of children, and in almost every case, they are more appreciated than a simple first name basis. Several of our house parents coach little league baseball, basketball, or soccer, and most of them have two basic rules for their team. Players must say yes, sir, to the coach and do whatever he asks them to do. Players cannot laugh at another child who makes a mistake. A couple a couple of our dads have even told parents of disrespectful children, I don't want your child talking to you that way around our team. They are setting a bad example. Respect begins with the way we speak to one another. Although it is often said it bears repeating, children want limits and they want to be available to respect the others who set those limits. They want to know where the fence is. That's their security. And finally, they want to know what will happen when they cross the line. A parent who tries to be buddy will soon have a tyrant for a child. The same theory applies in any other child relationship. Our house parents establish their authority with each child by being firm, knowing they can always easy up at the appropriate time if they begin the relationship by being lax. They have a hard time imposing new rules later. That's where the next principle of discipline, discipline comes in. Be so consistent you are boring. A child should know or at least be able to predict the consequence of any action. Going back to Doug and Julie's house for another illustration, they have been house parents for a little more than a year, and all of the children knew the rules. At a family meeting shortly after a new child moved in, Julie told them about something she had planned, and the new boy said, That sucks. Instantly, instantly, the room fell silent, and the other kids turned slowly toward him. What? What did I say? The new boy asked. The children explained to him that nobody talked like that in their house, and he was in big trouble. Julie and Doug had been so constant in their discipline that the children knew the consequence by heart. Contrast that story with David, a boy in my Sunday school class who was having problems getting along with his parents, disobeying them and even making fun of them. I explained to David that when he was being disrespectful to his parent, he was being disrespectful to God. He said he would do better. A few weeks later, I asked David how he was getting along with his parents. He said, We are working on it. I said, You don't need to work on it. You just need to realize who's bosses. If any If you can't take orders from parents, you might not ever be able to hold down a job. In David's case, I am afraid the parents never established themselves as leaders of the household through consistent discipline. He would have to rely on a compassionate but firm teacher, coach, or boss to demonstrate consistency. How many families have you seen that are ruled by a child? By age 5, some children already dictate to their parents what they will do. They know their parents would rather give in to their demands than deal with a tantrum. I have seen dozens of children through the years who never understand respect for authority. Their parents rarely enforced discipline at home until the children were completely out of control. Then they flew off the handle and slapped or hit the children. Their inconsistent message only amplified the problem. Be so consistent with your discipline that you're boring. A word about corporal punishment. Some parents rely on Proverbs 22:15 to command respect. Folly is bounded up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. But the merits of corporal punishments are debatable, and the rod does not have to be literal. If you strike a child in anger, you may lose control. My father was that way. If we didn't respect him in every way, he would pull out the leather strap he used to sharpen his razor and whip us unmercifully. We didn't do anything to cross my dad. Many of the children who comes to our foster home have been physically abused. They have been thrown against walls and across rooms. They have been slapped hard by angry parents. State regulation prevent physical punishment of foster children. So the house parents have to be creative in their punishment. For example, when the whole house is going out for Chick-fil-A or pizza, a child being punished might have to take a peanut butter sandwich from home. Or you can deny television or computer privilege. A child would rather get a spanking than to than be denied TV for a week. The most effective punishment is not always the first one that comes to mind. Paul Anderson, who was the world's strongest man, built a home in South Georgia for boys who were in repeated trouble and who otherwise would be in youth detention. Those boys knew they couldn't frighten or intimidate Paul Anderson, and by his mere presence he commanded respect. But they learned to respect Paul's heart and his words more than his physical strength. You don't have to be the world's strongest man to earn the respect of a child or a teenager. You do have to be strong enough to stand your ground against an onslaught of resistance. The power of a rocking chair. I have relied on the power of a rocking chair hundreds of times since I learned about it more than 20 years ago. We had not yet built our first foster home, and I asked the director of a foster facility near our Chick-fil-A headquarters in Atlanta how she handled discipline. If they're misbehaving, if they're misbehaving, she said, I grabbed them by the collar, put them in my lap in the rocking chair, and say, let me rock some of the meanness out of you. Now, all of our foster home have rocking chairs. I have rocked the meanness out of many infants, young children, and even teenagers who needed to experience quiet, soothing love. You may think children have outgrown the desire to be rocked to sleep at night. They have not. Particular children who have not had an abundance of love expressed to them. They are eager to be rocked or hugged and reminded that they are loved. So if you don't have a rocking chair, get one. And if you have one, use it. The power of silence. A visit to a church with the wind-shaped home family in Brazil showed me the power of silence. After a long service on Hartfield, I asked the foster mother, Christina Stevanato, how they managed to keep the children quiet and still. She said they don't have an option. She earned their respect through consistent discipline and they knew what was expected of them. I came home, explained to my Sunday school boys that they no longer had an option about whether to behave or to sit quietly through the lesson. If they choose to do otherwise, I briefly stopped the lesson, and in the silence of the moment, the transgressor realizes what is happening and stops. Of course, the power of silence only works when children respect the person in authority. Model respect for authority. If children have no respect for authority, no amount of punishment is going to change them. One of the best ways to teach children respect for authority is to model our own adherence to the chain of command. Others can do this by worshiping and respecting God and by obeying the rules of law. It amazed me how many people will cheat on their income taxes, lie to a police officer who stops them for speeding, or take advantage of a clerk who gives them too much change in clear view of their children, and it saddens me how many families no longer worship together and show their respect for the ultimate authority. The first day Alan showed up in my Sunday school class, he was wearing a coat and tie. His shirt was pressed neatly and his police shoes gleamed. He raised his hand and answered several questions correctly. When church started that morning, I noticed that he sat with his mother. His father was not in church. After church, Drew Allen's father picked him up in his car and they drove off. The next week, Allen was back, and the scenario repeated itself. Over time, I learned that Alan had a close relationship with his father. They were friends. Every Sunday after church, they played golf or went hunting or fishing together. The father had simply chosen not to attend church. not to acknowledge a higher authority through worship. He left he left it to his wife to take Ellen each week. In addition to being bright, Ellen was industrious. He had a paper route and was saving his money to buy a car. By the time he turned 16, he had saved enough for a car and a motorcycle, and his parents allowed him to buy them. With the freedom his vehicle gave him, he found a new set of friends, and he no longer came to church. I later learned that he and his father stopped their Sunday afternoon routine as well. In the summer of 1969, when war and riots were splitting America at the seams, I stood in the driveway at Alan's home and watched his family dissolving. As Alan rode away with his friends in a beat up Volkswagen van for a music festival in upstate New York, his father asked, "What did I do wrong?" He began Alan to stay home, but Alan refused. Soon Ellen's girlfriend became pregnant. Any hopes of college had vanished, and a child was born to unwed teenage parents. Whether I had an answer for Ellen's father on that August afternoon didn't matter. I gave him what I thought he needed: sympathy. But I felt more sympathy for Alan because in the critical year and long before he turned 18, something had gone wrong. He needed more direction than he had received. He needed to be shown how to submit to authority because he no longer respect his father. He disregarded him at a critical time. When Alan's child arrived, I worry about the home life that little baby would experience if he would be built up as a responsible young person or mended later as an adult. How would Ellen teach him respect for authority? What's important now? The word win can stand for what's important now. One year, I challenged the boys in my Sunday school class to be 100% on time with their Bible, prepare for the lesson, and then to stay for church after Sunday school. One morning, we were on target to meet the challenge. Everyone was there on time and prepared. The class ended, and we were all headed for the sanctuary except Rayburn, who said he was going home. I didn't understand. Rayburn's mother worked in the nursery, and his sister always stayed for church, so it would have been easy for him to stay. The other boys were disappointed, and so I was I. Rayburn, I said, you could stay for church if you wanted to, couldn't you? Yes, he said, and he hung his head. Then I scolded him a bit and reminded him how important it was to the other boys and me to achieve our goal. We were so close to perfection, but Rayburn wouldn't but so I sent the other boys on to church. Then Rayburn pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Cathy, the reason I had to go home now is to be with my dad. He he's there at home, and he gives me his undivided attention while my mother and sister are gone. He gives that time to me." "Isn't he there on Sunday?" I asked. "Yes," Rayburn said. "But he drinking and there's a lot going on. We don't get much time together Sunday morning, It's the only time when it's just me and dad. A boy needs time with his father, and a man needs time with his father. Rayburn's father made the wrong choice. But I told my young friend, I am sorry for what I said, Rayburn. You're making the better decision to go home and be with your dad. Band aids on server on. If we choose not to build children with discipline, but instant, wait until they are others to fix them. The best we can do in many cases is to put a band-aid on a severe wound. My neighbor Leo Rabbit, an airline pilot, dedicated much of his life to applying such band-aids. Lou kept a guest house on his property where he invited drunks to come in and dry out. He arranged his flight schedule so he could be home at night. And every night, if he had an empty bed in the guest house, Lou drove the street of downtown Atlanta in search of any who wanted to be mended. It was never easy. The man had to commit to staying for at least 30 days, and they couldn't touch alcohol while they were there. He had many repeat visitors through the years, men who left and picked up the bottle again. I have never seen a man who didn't fall off the wagon a time or two before he finally got his feet on solid rock. Lou says some of the men were never able to find that solid rock, and it all begins with a choice each man had made years earlier. It goes back to sowing and reaping. You got Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. If an other's positive influence had been stronger than the pull of the crowd when his seed was being planted, he might never have reached for the first bottle. It's better to establish values early in life that will carry them over the critical years. Lou says, life is not summer camp, and we're not counselors. A child with one less body and one more other willing to help establish appropriate values. By setting limits through discipline may be changed forever. Thank you.